In June of 2022, DC Comics published their second annual Pride Special, an anthology comic book that gave queer creators the opportunity to tell stories about the LGBTQ+ superheroes and villains. There seems to be a lot of crossover between the antics of costume superheroes and the pageantry of Pride celebrations, but what was notable about this comic is that there was one story that was anything but a joyful celebration. While it didn't feature any costumed heroes, it did tell the story of a beloved figure from the DC universe. If you're not familiar with Kevin Conroy, he was an actor who is most notable for playing Batman from 1992 until his death in 2022. In many fans' minds, he was the voice of Batman, having played him in Batman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, Justice League, the Arkham games, and dozens of direct-to-DVD movies. By all accounts, he was a very charitable man, having volunteered to work to provide food for the first responders of 9/11 and worked very closely with children's charities. But he was also a very private man. And his 9-page short story, Finding Batman, which was illustrated by Jay Bone, goes some of the way towards explaining why. Now, if it wasn't already obvious by his inclusion in the anthology, Kevin Conroy was gay. He grew up in a devout Catholic family in the 1950s and really struggled with his identity, hoping and praying that he'd just magically change somehow. When that didn't happen, he learned to put on a figurative mask to hide who he really was. Despite this challenge, or maybe because of it, Kevin found an affinity for acting and earned himself a scholarship to Juilliard, a prestigious acting school in New York. Here, he studied alongside now famous figures like Robin Williams, Kelsey Grammer, and Christopher Reeve. As gifted as he was, he still went through the same struggles as any fledgling actor after he graduated. And he struggled to find work. In terms of his personal life, things didn't seem to get much better for him in adulthood. Something to remember about the 1970s and 1980s when Kevin was young is that the world was less accepting of homosexuality, particularly in the 1980s when the HIV/AIDS epidemic broke out. Kevin describes how the disease ravaged so many of his friends and peers. Actors, stagehands, directors, writers. It just tore through the creative community, robbing us of a generation of talent. And when casting directors and other people in positions of power learned that he was gay, they dropped him, unwilling to take a chance on someone whose lifestyle was so controversial. Similarly, the comic details how casually homophobic slurs were used towards him, and knowing how kind and compassionate he was, it's particularly outrageous to see him being abused in such a way. At the same time, Kevin was dealing with a highly dysfunctional family life. His father was an alcoholic, and he had a challenging relationship with his mother. When he was a boy, his father had attempted to commit suicide, and Kevin recounts how traumatizing it was to sit by his hospital bedside, waiting for him to recover. While Kevin was the youngest child in his family, his parents became his responsibility to look after towards the end of their lives because no one else would. At the same time, his elder brother Chris was suffering from schizophrenia, and he also needed Kevin's support. So as you can imagine, he was under a lot of pressure from his family, who didn't always treat him with the respect that he deserved, and the anxiety and strain bubbled away in the back of his mind. He mourned his parents despite the fact they were still technically alive. He longed for a more caring family life and wished he could be his authentic self. Rather than letting the weight of the anguish crush him, however, he projected a mask of confidence. And all of his life experience to that point, as painful and upsetting as it had been, informed his performance as Batman. He knew what it was like to feel loss and pain. He knew what it was like to hide his true self and project a different personality to the world. The short story ends with him auditioning to play Batman for Bruce Timm, Andrea Romano, and Eric Radomski, and in his mind, he draws parallels between young Bruce Wayne witnessing his parents' murder and his father's attempted suicide, laying there in a dried-up pool of his own blood. He saw his brother lost in his illness and mourned the life he would likely never have. All of these terrible things that had happened in his life, all of the anguish and strife led to that exact moment, and the rest is history. Now, I'm a big believer that our biggest setbacks in life can sometimes become opportunities, and I think that Kevin's story really demonstrates that. If he hadn't had the challenging upbringing, and if he hadn't felt the need to hide his true self, he may never have found his way to becoming an actor. He may not have gotten the role of Batman. And when you think about how impactful he was in that role, and the number of lives he touched through it, I have to wonder if he might have felt that it was all worth it in the long run, and I sincerely hope he did. Sadly, we won't know for certain because Kevin passed away from cancer 4 months after Finding Batman was published. Shortly before he died, he posted a very short video on his social media pages thanking everyone for the strong response to his story, saying how meaningful it was that we supported him. Finding Batman went on to win the Eisner Award, the comic book equivalent of the Oscars, for Best Short Story in 2023, with DC editors Ariana Turturro and Jessica Chen accepting the award on his behalf. Kevin Conroy didn't just find Batman, he became him, not in spite of his pain, but through it. His performance wasn't simply iconic because of the voice, which was gravelly and commanding one moment, soft and wounded the next, but because behind it was a man who had lived the duality of Bruce Wayne and Batman. He was a man who knew the toll of wearing masks, the ache of having to constantly hide, and the weight of surviving what should have broken him. The reason Kevin endures as Batman is because he didn't just give Batman a voice, he gave him a soul. In Finding Batman, Kevin offered us a glimpse into the man behind it, and it was raw, vulnerable, and unflinchingly honest. It's a reminder that our despair can shape something meaningful, that pain can be channeled into art, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who have had to survive their own stories first. And speaking from my own experience, I started regularly making YouTube videos because Kevin Conroy had died, and talking about why Batman the Animated Series was so meaningful for me helped me to process my grief. And based on some of the comments I get, those videos have helped other people deal with their own issues. And that's just one of the many ways in which Kevin Conroy will live on, and the way that his legacy will continue to influence people for decades to come. Kevin Conroy gave us the definitive Batman, not because he played a superhero, but because he showed us what it takes to be one. We all have our own struggles and setbacks in life, and Kevin's story tells us that we can take those difficult experiences and turn them into something meaningful. The output doesn't have to be on the same global scale as his. We can just do our best to make sure that we treat each other with kindness and respect. It's what Kevin would have done, and I think ultimately it's what Batman would have done too. Next week, the story of Wally West continues in Absolute Flash number 4. Wally finds himself on the run and in Central City alongside his new pal, the little green psychic monkey, Grodd. What could possibly go wrong? Hope to see you then.